Welcome to This Explainer. Let's dive right in and take a fascinating journey from the abstract thoughts floating around inside our heads to the very real, very physical international laws that govern the globe. When we talk about human rights, it's so easy to just think of them as these vague, lofty ideals. But in reality, they are a highly structured, deliberately constructed system. It's actually a lot like building a house. And today, we're going to explore exactly how that house was built, from its conceptual foundations in ancient history all the way up to the modern international blueprints designed to keep us all safe. To make sense of this massive legal architecture, we've organized our blueprint into 5 quick chapters: Foundations of Freedom, 4 Generations of Rights, Citizens versus Humans, the UDHR Blueprint, and finally, Enforcing Global Covenants. Chapter 1: Foundations of Freedom. We have to begin our architectural journey at the very bedrock, which means looking at the philosophical concepts of liberty and freedom. Because, well, before you can have a right, you really have to understand what it means to be free. Think about the word itself for a second: liberty. It comes from the Latin liber, and it basically represents an individual's ability to act according to their own will. But here is the crucial catch: it is confined by societal boundaries. Liberty isn't just doing whatever you want whenever you want to do it. It's actually about the responsible use of freedom without depriving others of their own freedom. It's about being free from unnecessary restraints, but maintaining a deep, respectful connection to the society around us. To truly understand this balancing act, scholars actually split liberty into 2 distinct lenses. First, you have negative liberty, which defines a strictly personal domain. It is the freedom from external interference. Essentially, it means the government leaves you alone in your private life. Then you have positive liberty, which exists within the social domain. It is your freedom to act, but specifically within the constraints set by society and government to maintain stability. It's a clean contrast of how societies balance a purely personal space against a structured, government-supported world. And everyday life brilliantly illustrates this inherent tension between your individual liberty and our collective well-being. Think about things like public smoking bans or residential noise ordinances. You absolutely have the negative liberty, the personal freedom, to smoke a cigarette or blast your favorite music. But doing so indiscriminately in a crowded room or at 3 in the morning genuinely harms others through secondhand smoke or sleep disruption. So positive liberty steps in. The law restricts indoor smoking and enforces quiet hours to protect collective health and peace, while still respecting your private liberty to do those things in your own designated space. Chapter 2: 4 Generations of Rights. Now that we have our foundation, let's build the floors of our house and see how these philosophical concepts actually evolved into actionable, legally binding human rights across 4 distinct generations. Back in 1979, the distinguished human rights scholar Karel Vesak introduced this incredible color-coded progression to show how rights have evolved through history. First up, we have the blue rights. These are your first-generation civil and political rights, things like freedom of speech and the right to a fair trial. They're all about protecting the individual from the state. Second are the red rights, which emerged during the Industrial Revolution. These are social and economic rights, like the right to healthcare, fair wages, and education. Third are the green rights, focusing heavily on collective community needs, like a healthy environment and self-determination. And finally, the 4th generation brings us to modern rights, targeting things like digital inclusion, climate change, and protecting marginalized communities today. What's absolutely crucial to realize here is that these 1st and 2nd generation rights are fundamentally indivisible and interdependent. As this quote highlights, abstract civil liberties cannot be meaningfully exercised unless individuals possess the structural socioeconomic security required to enjoy them. Basically, you can't separate them. Giving someone the legal right to vote or freedom of speech means very little if they are starving or lack basic shelter. You need structural socioeconomic security to meaningfully exercise your freedom. Let's put this into the real world. You can guarantee 1st generation formal workplace equality on paper all day long. But if we ignore biological realities, like menstruation, we create a barrier that actively penalizes individuals. By implementing a 2nd generation right, like paid menstrual leave or health protections, we make that 1st generation civil equality physically possible. The exact same thing goes for Social Security. You literally cannot have true political participation or democratic engagement if an individual is completely destabilized by extreme poverty. Economic survival is the absolute prerequisite for civil action. Chapter 3: Citizens versus Humans. We now shift our focus to the perimeter of our house. We're exploring a fundamental legal distinction: who gets these rights automatically and who gets left out in the cold. This brings us to citizenship, which, if you think about it, is essentially a highly exclusive club. So how do you get in? It's usually through one of two primary legal mechanisms. First is jus soli, which translates to the right of the soil. That means you get citizenship simply based on the physical territory where you were born, completely regardless of who your parents are. On the flip side is jus sanguinis, or the right of blood. This means you inherit your citizenship directly through your parents' bloodline, no matter what country you happen to be physically born in. Both of these mechanisms establish a reciprocal relationship. The state protects you, and you obey its laws. But here is where the whole system fractures. Citizens hold incredible, unique rights, things like voting, absolute immunity from deportation, and access to subsidized healthcare. But non-citizens, particularly refugees and undocumented immigrants, remain highly vulnerable. Because domestic laws are specifically designed to prioritize a state's own citizens, those without citizenship face hazardous border pushbacks, a permanent fear of deportation, wage theft, and systemic exclusion from basic health services. It highlights a devastating disparity between localized citizenship privileges and the urgent need for universal, borderless human rights that protect people simply because they are human. Chapter 4: The UDHR Blueprint. And that devastating disparity leads us perfectly to the master architectural plans designed to bridge that exact gap, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Drafted right after the horrors of World War II, this was humanity's massive attempt to create a borderless standard. But there is a profound, largely unsung story here: the transformative impact female delegates had on ensuring universal gender neutrality in the drafting process. Hansa Mehta of India successfully changed the opening declaration from "all men are born free" to "all human beings are born free and equal." Minerva Bernardino of the Dominican Republic fought tooth and nail to explicitly include equality of men and women right in the preamble. And Begum Shaista Ikramullah of Pakistan strongly championed equal human rights within marriage. Without their brilliant foresight, this universal document would have been deeply flawed from day one. Let's look at how this document is structurally built. French drafter René Cassin did something fascinating. He explicitly laid out the 30 articles of the UDHR, like the portico of a traditional Greek temple. It makes a highly complex legal document deliberate and so easy to visualize. First, the preamble acts as the steps leading up, providing the historical context. Second, Articles 1 and 2 are the solid foundation blocks of dignity and equality. Third, Articles 3 through 27 act as 4 distinct pillars holding the structure up, covering individual rights, political rights, public freedoms, and economic rights. Finally, Articles 28 through 30 form the pediment, the roof binding the whole temple together, outlining our duties back to the community. And on December 10, 1948, this architectural blueprint was brought before the United Nations General Assembly. The overwhelming final vote, 48-0, in favor of adopting this landmark document. 8 nations abstained, sure, but not a single nation voted against it. It was a staggering, historic moment of global consensus. Chapter 5: Enforcing Global Covenants. Because, as we know, a blueprint is just a piece of paper until you actually build the house. To finish our journey, we must look at how the United Nations attempts to legally bind nations to these rights through international conventions. The UDHR was a declaration, not a legally binding treaty. So to give it actual teeth, the UN created 9 core treaties over the years. We're talking about heavy hitters like the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Hundreds of participating countries have ratified these treaties, voluntarily binding their own domestic laws to these international standards for women's rights, children's rights, and protections against torture. It's a massive global effort. But despite all these treaties, all these generations of rights, and the beautiful architecture of the UDHR, we still face a massive contradiction today. I want to leave you with this final thought. If human rights are truly universal, inherently belonging to everyone just for being human, why does basic survival still depend so heavily on the borders we happen to be born within? It's the ongoing tension between the exclusive privileges of citizenship and our collective global responsibility to one another. We've drawn the blueprints and we've built the house, but we are clearly still deciding who gets to live inside it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.